Okay, this is a rundown of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be going over some background info about the Fable genre. We are going to you are going to read and annotate our Fable. And then you have some pair assessment annotations, kind of like how we've been doing annotations with Cinderella and how we did annotations with Lion Witch in the Wardrobe towards the end. And then you just have, some things to do once you finish. So for this, you're going to be taking notes once again. So you're going to need your lined piece of paper. Remember, we are drawing a line. And that your topics go on the left with information going on the right. So I'll give you like 10 seconds to get yourselves together, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so the title of this is Fable genre. So you are writing at the top of your papers, Fable genre. Alright, so here's an overview of what a fable is. As per usual, you do not need to write the entire definition down, just write down the highlights. So just to break down what this means, so a fable is a fictional story, so that means that it is made up in prose or verse, so essentially it can be in the style of a poem, and it features animals, legendary creatures, plants, inanimate objects, or forces of nature that are anthropomorphized, so human-like. That's a lot of things. Let me just break this down a little bit. So these made-up stories that tend to be, sometimes on the shorter side, they need to include one of these listed things. They must include either animals, or they need to include legendary creatures. So that can be something like a mythical creature, like a unicorn, or like a fawn, or like a minotaur or a centaur. It must include plants. That's another option of something it can include. It can include inanimate objects. So in this case, when it's referring to plants and inanimate objects, so an inanimate object is something like a stapler, a jar, a pencil. That's not something that does anything. It just is what it is. However, in a fable, you would have like a talking plant or a talking lamp. Something else it could have is a force of nature that is anthropomorphized, so human-like. So that could mean so we talked about how, here's a talking plant, or here's a talking desk. We can even go so far as to having here's a talking tornado. Look at that, the ocean is speaking to me. That's what it means. So it needs to have one of these different things, but it needs to be anthropomorphized. So it needs to act like a human. So if you think of movies like Cars is an anthropomorphized inanimate object because it's a car with eyes that talks and for the most part acts like a person. Or if you think about The Lion King, those are animals that talk and dance and for the most part act like a human. So that's what a fable needs to contain. So it needs to contain one of these things, and the story illustrates or leads to a particular moral lesson. So essentially, it needs to involve some creature or inanimate object that's acting like a person. But these stories need to have a moral to it. So as some of you noticed in Cinderella, there kind of wasn't really a moral to that lesson or to that story. But in Fables, there has to be a lesson. It's not just a story, there has to be a lesson. And this lesson may be at the end, and it may be added explicitly as a concise maxim or saying. So, this moral, it may be in your face, or it could be a nice, short, sweet statement that's at the end. Something that's easy to remember. So, I'll give you like 10 more seconds, and then we're going to move on to the next bit. Okay. Here are some examples of fables. So, Animal Farm, we read that last year. You know, it featured talking animals that acted like humans, and there was a very clear moral at the end. We have the story of Spirited Away. That is also a fable. It also includes a lot of creatures and inanimate objects that act like people. In Dr. Seuss books, you'll often see inanimate objects or animals acting like people, such as in The Cat in the Hat. I mean, the cat itself, it acts like a human. Same with the fish that talks to the kids. And then Pan's Labyrinth is also an example of a fable, as well as Adventure Time. So we will be reading a famous fable by Aesop. Here is a rundown on some things about Aesop and Aesop's fables. This is your second topic, Aesop's fables. Now, unlike the Grimm brothers, Aesop goes way back. So, Aesop's fables, it's a collection of fables that are credited to Aesop. So basically, we think that Aesop is the one who wrote them, or at least Aesop is the one who wrote the stories down. Maybe Aesop didn't create them, but Aesop at least was the one who wrote things down and was the one who was telling these stories. So he was a enslaved man and a storyteller who lived in ancient Greece between 620 and 564 BCE. These fables, similarly to fairy tales, were part of an oral tradition and were not collected until about 3 centuries after Aesop's death. So, yeah, pretty crazy, because, yeah, Aesop may have been the one to have, quote-unquote, written things down, but it was all spoken. Like, he was the one who was telling these stories, spreading these stories. He might not have invented them himself, but he was the one who was, spreading it around town verbally. And yeah, this collection of stories wasn't even brought together until like 300 years after he died. On the right here are some examples of fables from the collection. We have The Frog and the Fox, The Frog and the Mouse, The Frog and the Ox, The Swan and the Goose, The Tortoise and the Hare, The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. Have you noticed a pattern about any of these titles? Exactly. Today, we are going to read a super famous fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Hence all of these good boys that you see on the slides. As you read, you are going to do sticky note annotations. However, this is a super duper short text, so you have more freedom to do annotations. You all have seen this before. These are just things where if you can't come up with something to do an annotation for, these options are to help guide you as to figure out what to do an annotation for. Make sure you are doing these on sticky notes. Basically, do a sticky anytime you feel you need to jot something down. So there's no limit on how many sticky note annotations you can make. I'm going to give you 15 minutes overall to read through the text and to do your annotations. And then after this, we will move on to typing out the annotations themselves. So 15 minutes to read through, and then we are going to move on. You have 3 minutes remaining. Okay, now we are going to go to pair assessment. You're going to open up The Boy Who Cried Wolf annotations. As per usual, you're going to select 3 to 4 ideas to begin with. You're going to place your chosen sticky notes somewhere where you can easily see them while you type, and then it's ramble time. You're basically word vomiting on your page. Write down thoughts you have about your chosen ideas. And remember, it does not have to be organized. But please use punctuation though, because it's easier for me to read when you have punctuation. So just expand on your ideas and see if you can make any connections between your ideas. If you get stuck, here are some questions to help drive you and drive your typing. But you are typing the entire time, the entire 10 minutes. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to get yourselves ready to go, and then we are actually starting. So, get yourselves ready. We are going to officially start in 30 seconds. All right, with that, take 10 minutes, type away, and submit when you are complete. go ahead and submit your work. And that is it for this video.